The sun hadn't even risen when Lourdes de Conceição woke with a jolt, not because of the alarm clock, which she never needed, but because of the shouts coming from the living room. It was 5:40 on a cold Friday morning in June, and the noise echoed through the marble halls of the Albuquerque mansion like an unexpected thunderclap. Lourdes slipped on her worn slippers, pulled her robe over her nightgown, and walked down the icy corridor, her heart heavy and her hands trembling. She didn't know what was happening, but she felt that old weight in her chest, that fear that every black woman knows from childhood, the fear of being accused for something she didn't do. When she reached the living room, she found Mrs. Helena standing, her face red with anger, her hair still pulled back in its nighttime bun, her eyes fixed on Lourdes as if she were the worst creature in the world. Beside her employer, Dr. César Albuquerque, a respected lawyer in a dark suit even at that hour, stood with his arms crossed, his expression grim. And further back, leaning against the wall with an air of someone who already knew everything, was Nosa, the cook, her eyes downcast, avoiding any eye contact. "You!" Mrs. Helena shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Lourdes. "You stole my jewelry! I know it was you! Don't try to deny it." Her voice was sharp, cutting, filled with a cruel certainty that needed no proof. Lourdes felt the floor tremble beneath her bare feet. Her hands tightened on the hem of her robe. She tried to speak, but her voice came out weak, almost inaudible, choked by the knot in her throat. "I didn't do anything, Mrs. Helena. I swear to God, by the lives of my children, I didn't take anything from you." But Mrs. Helena wouldn't listen. She didn't even look at Lourdes. She turned to her husband and ordered, with a chill that cut to the bone, "César, call the police, now. I will not tolerate this in my house." Dr. César picked up his cell phone without hesitation. Lourdes took a step forward, her hands outstretched, pleading. "Doctor, please, I've worked here for 3 years. You know what I'm like. I've never even taken a glass of water without asking." But he didn't even look at her. He just dialed the number and began speaking to someone on the other end of the line, his voice deep and measured, the voice of someone with power who knows it. Lourdes felt her legs weaken. She looked around, searching in someone's eyes for a sign of compassion, of doubt at least, but she found only contempt. Nosa kept her head down. Dr. César was on the phone. Mrs. Helena stared at her with pure hatred. And it was at that moment, her body still trembling and her eyes welling up, that Lourdes instinctively touched the blue beaded necklace she always wore around her neck. That necklace was an heirloom, from her grandmother, who had been a laundress in even tougher times, from her great-grandmother, who had been enslaved and died free, but landless, from all the women in her lineage who had carried the world on their backs and still hadn't lost their faith. Lourdes couldn't explain it, but she felt that those beads held prayers. They held strength. They held the dignity of all the women who had come before her, and in that moment she needed every drop of that strength. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel for stories that touch your heart every day. When the police arrived, Lourdes was sitting in the kitchen, her hands folded in her lap, praying softly. The whole house seemed to breathe against her. Nosa was making coffee with trembling hands, but she didn't say a word. Valdo, the driver, who always arrived early, wasn't there. No one mentioned it. No one asked about him. The accusation already had a face, a color, and a name. One of the officers entered the kitchen, looked Lourdes up and down with that tired gaze of someone who had seen this scene 1,000 times, and said, with rehearsed gruffness, "Get up! We need to take you to the station." Lourdes obeyed. Her legs felt like lead. She stood up slowly, her hand gripping the necklace as if it could stop her from falling. As she passed through the living room, she saw Gabriel. The 8-year-old boy was standing at the top of the rich wooden staircase, watching everything with those big, attentive eyes that missed nothing. Gabriel hardly ever spoke. He was autistic, and most people thought he didn't understand things. But Lourdes knew Gabriel understood everything, and in a way that adults couldn't. He saw what no one else saw. He felt what no one else felt. And in that moment, he was seeing injustice happen right in front of him. Lourdes tried to smile at him, but she couldn't. Tears were already streaming down her face. Gabriel took 2 steps down, as if he wanted to say something, but Mrs. Helena pulled him by the arm forcefully and took him back to his room, saying aloud so everyone could hear, "Don't look at her, Gabriel. She did something very bad indeed." Lourdes lowered her head. The officer put handcuffs on her wrists. The metal was cold, heavy. The sound of the cuffs clicking shut echoed through the entire house like a death knell. And as Lourdes was led away, walking slowly between the 2 officers, she felt that they were taking a piece of her dignity with them, a piece of her soul, a piece of everything she had built with so much effort, so much sweat, so much faith. The front door closed behind her with a sharp thud, and in the big house a heavy silence settled over everything. Lourdes de Conceição had been born and raised in Itaquera, on the east side of São Paulo, in a shack made of wood covered with a blue tarp, where there was little more than her mother's love and the daily hunger. She was the oldest of 5 siblings. She learned early to take care of the house, to make food out of almost nothing, to wash clothes in the tub until her hands were raw. She also learned that black women couldn't make mistakes. There was no margin for error. One wrong step and the whole world would point fingers. Her mother, Dona Zélia, worked as a domestic helper in 3 different houses. She left before dawn and returned late at night, exhausted, but always with a tired smile for her children. It was she who taught Lourdes that work dignifies, but that dignity doesn't come from work. It comes from within. Lourdes married at 18 to Joachim, a good man, a construction worker who died at 32 in a construction accident. She was widowed at 35, with 2 young children to raise, Diego, 7, and Thais, 5. Since then, Lourdes had worked as a cleaner to support the household. She cleaned offices at night, did laundry for pay on weekends, and cleaned houses during the week. The Albuquerque mansion was her 3rd steady job and the best paid. She earned 1,200 reais a month, with a signed contract to work Monday through Friday from 6 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. At first, she was impressed by the size of that house. There were 4 bathrooms, 6 bedrooms, a pool nobody used, a garden with imported flowers she'd never seen before. Everything was clean, organized, impeccable. The towels were changed daily. The sheets were Egyptian linen. The dishes came from Europe. Lourdes spent hours cleaning mirrors, waxing the marble floors, changing embroidered towels, watering the garden plants. And no one said good morning. No one asked if she wanted water. No one looked her in the eye. Mrs. Helena Albuquerque was an elegant woman, 48 years old, her hair always pulled back in a perfect bun, manicured nails weekly, expensive clothes she wore once and then donated. She spoke to Lourdes always from behind, giving short, curt orders, as if programming a robot. Lourdes, clean the dining room. Lourdes, iron these clothes by tomorrow. Lourdes, don't forget to dust the bookshelf. She never called Lourdes Mom, never said please, never thanked her. It was as if Lourdes wasn't a person, just a function, just a tool, just hands that cleaned and disappeared. Dr. Cesar Albuquerque, her husband, was even more distant. A criminal defense attorney, partner at a downtown Chicago firm, he left early and returned late. When he crossed paths with Lourdes in the hallways, he didn't even see her. He simply passed by, cell phone in hand, mind elsewhere. Nusa, the cook, was older, almost 60, and had worked there for 10 years. At first, Lourdes thought they'd be friends, that they'd have that camaraderie of people sharing the same load, but Nusa was reserved, suspicious, and treated Lourdes with a coldness that hurt more than the employer's disdain. But there was Gabriel. The 8-year-old boy everyone thought was strange, who didn't talk right, who preferred to stay alone drawing in his room rather than playing with other children. Gabriel was autistic. He had meltdowns when the noise got too loud. He didn't like to be touched. He avoided making eye contact with people, but with Lourdes, he was different. He followed her around the house, watched her sweep, clean, tidy up. He'd sit on the kitchen floor while she cleaned the stove, drawing in silence. And sometimes, when Lourdes softly hummed an old samba while hanging clothes on the line in the garden, Gabriel would smile. A small, rare, but genuine smile. And that smile was worth more than any salary. Lourdes kept a crumpled photo of her children in her apron pocket. She looked at it every time she felt like crying, every time Mrs. Helena's voice became too sharp, every time exhaustion hit hard. They depended on her. She couldn't falter, she couldn't give up. Every Friday she went home with her money counted, stopped at the corner market, bought rice, beans, a piece of chicken, 2 tomatoes, an onion. She cooked with love, shared the meal, told stories. And when the boys slept, she stayed awake, sewing their clothes, running her hand over the blue bead necklace she never took off. That necklace was an inheritance. From her maternal grandmother, Dona Conceição, who did laundry for others by the river in Bahia. From her great-grandmother, whose name she never knew, but knew she had been enslaved on a cocoa plantation. From all the women who came before her, who washed, cooked, cleaned, and resisted. Lourdes couldn't explain it, but she felt those beads held prayers. They held strength, they held dignity, and it was with that necklace that she got into the police car. With that necklace that she was booked. With that necklace that she spent her first night in a cold, hard cell without a pillow, crying softly so no one would hear. But even there in the darkness, she touched the blue beads and felt she wasn't alone. Lourdes' first months at the Albuquerque mansion were quiet. She arrived every day at 6 in the morning, entered through the back door, changed in the maid's room next to the laundry room, and began to work. The routine was always the same. First, the kitchen, then the bathrooms, then the bedrooms, last the living room and the garden. She cleaned everything with attention, with care, even with affection, because Lourdes took pride in her work. It didn't matter if no one thanked her. She knew she was doing a good job, and that was enough. Gabriel was the first to notice her. At first, he just watched her from afar, with that attentive, curious gaze. Then he started following her from room to room. He'd sit on the floor while she mopped, stand in the doorway while she changed the sheets, accompany her to the garden when she watered the plants. Mrs. Helena would get annoyed. "Gabriel, get away from there. Let Lourdes work." But the boy wouldn't obey. He liked being near her. Lourdes never rushed him, never sent him away. She just smiled, hummed softly, and let him stay. One day, Gabriel brought her a drawing. It was a simple drawing, done with colored pencils, a woman with a bucket in her hand and a blue necklace around her neck. Below it, written in wobbly letters, the name Lourdes. She felt her eyes well up with tears. "Is this for me, my angel?" Gabriel nodded without speaking. Lourdes carefully folded the paper and put it in her apron pocket. "Thank you, my love. I'll keep it forever." And she did. She took the drawing home, taped it to the refrigerator, and every time she looked at it, her heart felt warm. But not everything was light. Nusa, the cook, never opened up to Lourdes. She answered in monosyllables, avoided conversations, and whenever Mrs. Helena complained about something, Nusa agreed in silence, as if she were on the employer's side. Lourdes tried to be kind, offered help, shared the lunch she brought from home, but Nusa kept her distance. There was something bitter about her, something Lourdes couldn't understand, maybe envy, maybe fear, maybe just exhaustion from carrying the world alone for so long. And there was Valdo, the driver, a man in his 40s, thin, always wearing a cap, who had worked there for 2 years. Valdo was too friendly, talked too much, laughed too loudly. He asked about everyone's life but never told anything about his own. Lourdes always felt there was something strange about him, but she couldn't say what. He greeted her every day, asked about her children, offered her a ride, but his gaze was never clean. There was always something calculated, something false. Lourdes thanked him politely and refused. She preferred to take the bus, even if it took 2 hours. One day, Valdo appeared in the kitchen while Lourdes was eating lunch alone. He pulled up a chair and sat in front of her with a wide smile. "Hey, Lourdes, everything okay?" She nodded, continuing to eat in silence. "You're a hard worker, huh? You do your job right. The bosses like you." Lourdes gave a half smile. "I just do my job." "Exactly," Valdo said, lowering his voice. "But have you noticed the things in this house? What's all this worth?" Lourdes frowned. "It's none of my business." Valdo laughed, but it was an odd sound. "Yeah, it really isn't." And he left, leaving an awkward silence in his wake. Lourdes didn't say anything, but it stuck with her. A few days later, she noticed Valdo was acting jumpy. He was arriving earlier, leaving later, lurking around the house, going into rooms where he had no reason to be. Once, she saw him leaving Dr. Cesar's office, glancing around furtively as if checking if anyone had seen him. Lourdes pretended not to notice, but she made a mental note. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, Valdo quit, abruptly, without notice. He said he'd found something better. Dr. Cesar was surprised, but he accepted. The next day, Valdo didn't show up anymore, and on Friday morning, Mrs. Helena's necklace disappeared. It was an antique emerald inherited from her grandmother, valued at over $10,000. It was kept in the bedroom safe, a modern electronic safe that only Mrs. Helena and Dr. Cesar knew the combination to. Or at least, that's what they thought. When Mrs. Helena discovered it was gone, she panicked. She tore the room apart, called her husband, screamed, cried, and then she looked around. Who had access to that room? Who cleaned it every day? Who spent hours alone in the house? Lourdes. The answer came quickly. Cruel, and too certain to be questioned. After all, who else could it have been? At the police station, Lourdes was booked, fingerprinted, and taken to a cell at the back of the building. It was a small, damp cell with peeling walls and a strong smell of urine and mildew. There were 3 other women in there. One was lying on the floor asleep. Another was smoking an unlit cigarette, staring blankly. The third, a grey-haired woman, looked at Lourdes and asked softly, "First time?" Lourdes nodded, still trembling. The woman nodded, her gaze tired. "We never did anything, honey, but they always think we did." Lourdes sat in a corner, hugged her knees and began to cry. She cried softly, so no one would hear, but the tears came from such a deep place they seemed endless. She thought of her children. How would she explain it to them? How would she look them in the eye and say their mother had been arrested? She thought of her mother, Mrs. Zelia, who must be at home praying at that moment, not understanding what had happened. She thought of the blue bead necklace, which the police had allowed her to keep, and which was now tight in her hand, as if it were the only real thing in the world. She spent the first night wide awake, lying on the cold floor, wrapped in a thin blanket that smelled of mildew, staring at the cracked ceiling, trying to understand how she had ended up there. She had never stolen anything in her life, not a cent, not a loaf of bread, not a pen. She had worked since she was 13, paid her bills, raised her children, went to church on Sundays, and now she was here, arrested, accused of a crime she didn't commit. How was this possible? How could the world be so unfair? On the second day they tried to interrogate her. A middle-aged detective, tired with a face that had seen it all, called her into a cramped, windowless room with a metal table and 2 chairs. "Sit down," he said without looking at her. Lourdes sat, her hands trembling. "Lourdes de Conceição, right? How long have you worked for the Albuquerques?" 3 years, sir. "And you knew about the safe?" "I cleaned the room, sir, but I never touched anything." "But you knew where the safe was, didn't you?" "I knew it existed. But I never went near it. And the combination? Did you know the combination? No, sir. How would I know? The detective sighed, flipping through some papers. The boss said only she and her husband knew the combination. But the jewelry is gone, and you were the only person who had access to the room. But I didn't take anything, I swear! Lurdz's voice came out loud, desperate. The detective looked at her indifferently. That's what they all say. Lurdz returned to the cell with a broken heart. No one believed her. No one heard her. She was guilty before the trial even began. Guilty for being who she was. Guilty for being where she was. Guilty for existing. And worst of all, she knew that even if they proved her innocence one day, that stain would never wash away. People would always look at her and remember, oh, her, the one who was arrested. The truth didn't matter. The accusation did. Meanwhile, at the Albuquerque mansion, life went on. Mrs. Helena was nervous but relieved. Finally, they had found the culprit. Or at least, that's what she told her friends on the phone. Can you imagine, dear, 3 years working here, and we trusted her, and it's frightening, you know. You never know who's inside your house. Dr. Cesar came home late from the office, too tired to think about it. For him, the case was closed. The police had arrested the responsible party. Now it was just a matter of time until the trial, and everything would go back to normal. But there was someone who couldn't forget. Gabriel. The boy spent hours locked in his room, drawing. He drew Lourdes with the blue necklace. He drew the open safe. He drew a man in a baseball cap. He drew the side gate of the house, the one that led to the backyard, where hardly anyone ever went. He drew non-stop, as if trying to put together a puzzle in his head, as if trying to understand something the adults weren't seeing. Mrs. Helena entered his room and saw the drawings scattered on the floor. What is all this, my son? Gabriel didn't answer. He just pointed to a drawing. Mrs. Helena picked one up. She saw Lourdes. She saw the safe. She saw the man in the cap. She frowned. Who is this man, Gabriel? The boy didn't speak. He just pointed to the drawing again. Mrs. Helena sighed, impatient. Son, this doesn't make any sense. Stop thinking about it. And she left the room, leaving the drawings behind, as if they were just meaningless scribbles, kid stuff, nonsense. But Gabriel didn't give up. He knew. He had seen. The afternoon the necklace disappeared, he was in the garden playing alone, and he saw Valdo coming out of his parents' room, looking around nervously. He saw him go to the side gate, open the hidden compartment that was there, a space no one else knew about, but which Gabriel knew because he liked to explore every corner of that house. He saw him put something small and shiny inside, and then he saw him leave, as if nothing had happened. Gabriel tried to tell, but the words wouldn't come out. They never did when he needed them most. So he did what he knew how to do. He drew. He drew everything, and he waited for someone to understand. On the 3rd day in the cell, Lourdes stopped crying. Not because the pain had passed, but because there were no more tears. Her body was exhausted, her mind numb. She had barely eaten. The bread they gave her was hard, dry, inedible. The water tasted like rust. She drank because she had to, but every sip seemed to scratch her throat on the way down. The grey-haired lady sharing her cell was named Irene Jenkins. She'd been arrested for shoplifting at a supermarket. She'd grabbed a can of powdered milk for her hungry granddaughter. She'd been waiting for her hearing for a week. Time just crawls in here, honey, she said, her voice raspy. We're trapped twice, once in our bodies and once in our minds. Lourdes spent her hours praying. She prayed for her grandmother, for her mother, for God, for the orishas her grandmother invoked on full moon nights. She prayed for time to pass quickly. She prayed for the truth to come out. She touched her blue beaded necklace and repeated softly, like a mantra, I am innocent, I am innocent, I am innocent, as if saying it was enough to change the world, as if truth had power on its own. But out there, the world kept spinning. Lourdes' children, Diego and Thais, were staying with their grandmother, Zelia. She couldn't understand what had happened. Lourdes would never do something like that. She knew her daughter. She knew the woman she had raised. She knew the honesty that ran in that girl's veins since she was little. But what could she do? She didn't have money for a lawyer. She had no influence. She had no voice. She could only pray. And that's what she did. She lit a white candle in the corner of the living room, placed a glass of water beside it, and prayed for justice to arrive. Diego, 12, didn't quite understand what had happened. All he knew was that his mother wasn't home, that she didn't come home at night smelling of soap and exhaustion, that she didn't sit at the table for dinner or help him with his homework. Thais, 10, asked every day, "Grandma, when is Mum coming back?" And Zelia didn't know what to say. Soon, sweetie. Soon, but soon seemed further away each day. At the Albuquerque mansion, life went on. Mrs. Albuquerque hired another housekeeper, a young woman in her early 20s, who cleaned quickly and left without a word. Gabriel didn't like her, not because she was bad, but because she wasn't Lourdes. She didn't sing old songs. She didn't smile at him. She didn't let him hang around while she worked. Gabriel stayed in his room, drawing, always drawing. And every time his mother came in, he showed her the same drawings: Lourdes, the safe, the man in the baseball cap, the gate. Mrs. Albuquerque began to get irritated. "Gabriel, that's enough. Forget it. Lourdes doesn't work here anymore." But Gabriel didn't forget. He couldn't forget because he knew, and he didn't understand why the adults couldn't see what was so clear to him. One night during dinner, Gabriel did something rare. He spoke. "It wasn't her," he said, his voice low but firm. Dr. Albuquerque stopped eating and looked at his son. "What is it, Gabriel?" "It wasn't her." "It wasn't who?" "Lourdes. It wasn't her." Mrs. Albuquerque sighed, impatient. "Gabriel, honey, stop it. The police have it all figured out. She confessed." But Gabriel shook his head, his eyes full of tears. "No, it wasn't her. It was the man." Dr. Albuquerque exchanged a look with his wife. This was strange. Gabriel rarely spoke, and when he did, it was usually about important things. "What man, son?" Gabriel got up from the table, went to his room, and came back with one of the drawings. He placed it on the table in front of his parents. It was the most detailed drawing of all. It showed Valdo, wearing the cap, leaving the room, going to the side gate, opening a section of the gate, putting something inside. Dr. Albuquerque picked up the drawing and looked at it closely. His heart began to beat faster. "Helena, look at this." She looked, and for the first time she felt a pang of doubt. "Gabriel," Dr. Albuquerque said, lowering himself to his son's level, "did you see this? Did you see Valdo doing this?" Gabriel nodded yes. "When?" Gabriel didn't answer with words. He just picked up another drawing, a makeshift calendar with an X on Thursday, the day before the jewelry disappeared, the day Valdo had quit. Dr. Albuquerque felt a chill run down his spine. "My God!" Mrs. Albuquerque turned pale. But he quit. He left." "Exactly," said Dr. Albuquerque, already reaching for the phone. "Exactly why?" That same night, Dr. Albuquerque called the police. He explained everything, showed them Gabriel's drawings, gave them the address they had for Valdo in the household records. The police began their investigation, and 2 days later, Valdo was found. Valdo was located in a cheap hotel in the northern part of the city. He was preparing to travel upstate, to disappear. But the police got there first. When they knocked on the hotel room door, he tried to escape through the window, but he was caught in the hallway. Inside his backpack, they found the emerald, still wrapped in a black cloth, hidden in a false bottom of the side pocket. The same emerald Mrs. Albuquerque swore Lourdes had stolen. During the interrogation, Valdo tried to deny it at first. He said he'd found the jewel lying around. Said he didn't know where it came from, But when they showed him Gabriel's drawings, when they explained that the boy had seen everything, he broke down. He confessed, said he needed money, that he had gambling debts, that he knew where Mrs. Albuquerque kept her valuables because he'd once gone into her room to take a suitcase and saw her opening the safe. He memorized the combination, waited for the right opportunity. And when he realized the blame had fallen on Lourdes, he stayed quiet, just watched. He quit, and he was going to disappear. "And Lourdes?" asked the detective, his voice hard. "You knew she was in jail." Valdo lowered his head. "I knew." "And you didn't say anything?" "No." "Why?" Valdo shrugged, not meeting the detective's eyes. "Because it was better her than me." The coldness of that answer echoed through the room. The detective felt disgusted. "You miserable wretch!" And he ordered him arrested. The news reached the precinct where Lourdes was still being held. A police officer opened the cell and called out, "Lourdes da Conceição." She stood up, startled, thinking she was going to be interrogated again. "You can get your things. You're free." Lourdes blinked, not understanding. "What? You're free." It was a mistake. The driver confessed. Lourdes felt her legs go weak. Irene Jenkins, the lady sharing her cell, stood up and hugged her, crying, "Thank God, my daughter, thank God." Lourdes couldn't speak. She just cried, clutching her blue beaded necklace with both hands. She walked out in the same clothes she'd been wearing 3 days ago, crumpled, dirty, smelling of mildew, but with her head held high. When she reached the street, she saw a group of neighbors waiting for her. Saida, the fruit vendor. Manet, the popcorn seller. Joanna, the manicurist. Zay, the building's doorman, all with flowers in their hands. Simple garden flowers, picked from backyards, but worth more than any jewel. Lourdes broke down crying, and they embraced her. There, on the sidewalk, under the strong midday sun, without fanfare, without microphones, without cameras, just people, just love. Zelia arrived running with Diego and Thais. The boys threw themselves into their mother's arms, crying loudly, "Mom! Mom!" Lourdes hugged them with all her might, breathing in the scent of their hair, feeling the warmth of their small bodies against her chest. "I'm here, my children. I'm here." And in that embrace, everything fell back into place. The pain, the shame, the injustice, it was all washed away by tears of relief. That same afternoon, Dr. Cesar called Lourdes. He apologized, said he'd made a mistake, that he'd judged her unfairly, that he wanted to make it up to her somehow. Lourdes listened in silence, the phone pressed to her ear, feeling a mix of anger and exhaustion. "You can make it up to me by doing one thing, doctor," she said, her voice firm. "You can believe people before you accuse them. You can look them in the eye before you call the police. You can remember that we're people too." On the other end of the line, Dr. Cesar was silent. There was nothing to say. I understand," he murmured. "Would you like to come back to work here? With a raise, of course." "No," Lourdes replied without hesitation. "I'm not coming back, but thank you." And she hung up. But there was one person Lourdes wanted to see. Gabriel. She asked Dr. Cesar if she could stop by the mansion just to say goodbye to the boy. He agreed, and 2 days later, on a Saturday afternoon, Lourdes returned to the Albuquerque mansion. Mrs. Helena opened the door. She was pale, thin, with deep circles under her eyes. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in 3 days. "Lourdes, I don't know what to say." Lourdes took a deep breath. She touched the blue beaded necklace. "The truth doesn't need to shout, Mrs. Helena," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "It always comes out, always." Mrs. Helena lowered her head, ashamed. There was nothing to say. No excuse would be enough. Dr. Cesar appeared behind her, equally contrite. We'd like to compensate you, Lourdes. Pay you for the days you were held, for the suffering. You don't need to," Lourdes said. "I just came to get one thing." "What?" Mrs. Helena asked, confused. "My dignity," Lourdes replied, "and to say goodbye to Gabriel." Gabriel was in the garden when Lourdes arrived. He was sitting under the jabuticaba tree, drawing. When he heard her voice, he lifted his head suddenly, and for the first time in weeks, his eyes sparkled. He dropped his sketchbook on the ground and ran. He ran like he'd never run before, and he threw himself into Lourdes's arms, hugging her with a strength she didn't know the boy possessed. Lourdes fell to her knees on the ground, hugging him back, crying, laughing, feeling her heart explode with emotion. "I knew it," Gabriel said, his voice low but clear. "I always knew." "I know, my love," Lourdes replied, stroking his hair. "I know. Thank you for not giving up on me." Gabriel pulled back a little and handed her a new drawing. It was Lourdes, with the blue necklace shining on her neck, and beside her Gabriel, both of them smiling in a garden full of flowers. Below, written in neat letters, was the phrase, "You are the most beautiful person in the world." Lourdes felt tears stream down her face again. She carefully folded the paper, put it in her pocket and said, "You saved my life, Gabriel. You're a hero." The boy shook his head. "No, you're the hero." And he hugged her again. Mrs. Helena and Dr. Cesar watched from a distance from the balcony, their hearts aching. For the first time, they saw Lourdes, not as the cleaner, not as the maid, but as the woman she had always been, strong, dignified, human. And they realized, too late, that they had thrown away something precious: trust, respect, humanity. That afternoon, before leaving, Lourdes had one last conversation with Mrs. Helena. The two were alone in the living room, facing each other. Mrs. Helena tried to speak, but her voice faltered. Lourdes waited patiently until her employer managed. "Lourdes, I know there's no forgiveness for what I did. I accused you without proof, without thinking, without seeing you as a person. You only saw what everyone sees," Lourdes interrupted, her voice calm. "A black woman, poor, who cleans your house, and you thought it was obvious, that it could only be me." Mrs. Helena lowered her head, ashamed. I'm so sorry." "I know you are," Lourdes said, "but knowing doesn't change what happened. It doesn't erase the 3 days I spent in jail. It doesn't erase the humiliation. It doesn't erase the fear I saw in my children's eyes." Mrs. Helena began to cry. "I was wrong. I was so wrong." "You were," Lourdes agreed, "but now you have a chance to learn, to look at others more carefully, to remember that everyone has a story, everyone has a family. Everyone deserves respect." Lourdes stood up, adjusted her blouse, and ran a hand over her blue beaded necklace. "I'm leaving now, and I won't hold a grudge, because grudges weigh you down, and I've carried enough weight in my life." She turned to leave, but first she looked at Mrs. Helena one last time. "The truth doesn't need to shout, Mrs. Helena. It always comes out, always." And she left. When Lourdes crossed the mansion's gate, she felt an enormous weight lift from her shoulders. It was as if she had left behind, in that big, cold house, all the pain, all the injustice, all the humiliation, and taken with her only what was essential, her dignity. Outside, her children were waiting for her. Diego and Thais ran to her, and the three walked together down the street hand in hand. The afternoon sun hit the blue beaded necklace, making it gleam, and Lourdes smiled. For the first time in days, she smiled a real smile. Because she knew that, despite everything, she had won. Not because she had proven her innocence, but because she had stood tall. She had kept her faith. She had kept her soul clean. And in that moment, as she walked with her children by her side, Lourdes felt the presence of the women who came before her, her Bahian grandmother, her enslaved great-grandmother, all the washerwomen, cooks, housekeepers who carried the world on their backs and never lost hope. They were there, in those blue beads, smiling, protecting, blessing, and Lourdes knew she wasn't alone. She never was. 6 months passed. Lourdes never returned to the Albuquerque mansion, but her story spread through the city. First, it was the neighborhood, then the church, then her mother's friends, and then someone told a journalist from a local website. The journalist published the story, and the story went viral. In a few days, thousands of people knew the name Lourdes de Conceição, the woman who was unjustly arrested, the woman who was saved by the drawing of an autistic child, the woman who forgave but didn't forget. Job offers started pouring in, many, of all kinds. But Lourdes chose carefully. She no longer wanted to work in homes where she was invisible, where she was treated like a tool. She wanted to be seen, to be respected, to be treated like a person. And that's how she met Dr. Mariana, a young lawyer in her early 30s who had a small downtown office. Dr. Mariana offered Lourdes a job as a general services assistant, but with a difference: a signed contract, a decent salary, a Christmas bonus, paid vacation, and a meal allowance. And most importantly, respect. "Here, Lourdes, you're part of the team," Dr. Mariana said on her first day. "You're no less important than anyone else. No one here is." Lourdes smiled, and she accepted. Her children grew up. Diego graduated with a degree in IT. He landed an internship at a tech company. Thais got accepted into college for elementary education. She was going to be a teacher, fulfilling the dream her mother never could. And every time the two looked at Lourdes, they saw in her the strongest woman in the world, the woman who was knocked down, humiliated, unjustly arrested. And still she rose. Still she carried on. Still she didn't lose faith. Gabriel kept drawing. But now he also spoke more. Therapy helped, his family's love helped, and Lourdes' memory helped too. He kept all the drawings he had made of her in a special folder, and every time he felt sad, he would open the folder and look, and remember that he had done the right thing, that he had saved someone, that he had been important. Mrs. Helena and Mr. Caesar changed, not overnight, but little by little. They never treated any employee the same way again. They started making eye contact, saying thank you, asking how people were doing, remembering that behind every uniform there was a person, a story, a family. Valdo was sentenced to 3 years in prison for felony theft. Lourdes didn't attend the trial. She didn't want to see his face. She didn't want to hear his excuses. For her, that chapter was closed. And she had better things to do: live. A year after the incident, Lourdes received a letter. It was from Gabriel. He was 15 now. The letter said, "Lourdes, I will never forget you. You taught me that the truth doesn't need to shout, that love is stronger than lies, that kindness always wins. Thank you for having been in my life. I love you." Lourdes kept the letter in her drawer, along with her children's photos, Gabriel's drawing, and the blue bead necklace. And every time she opened that drawer, she felt her heart warm. She continued to wear the necklace every day. It was part of her now, part of her story, part of the story of the women who came before her. And she knew that one day she would pass this necklace on to Thais, and Thais would pass it to her daughter. And the story would continue, the story of resilience, of faith, of dignity. One Sunday afternoon, Lourdes was sitting on her couch, having coffee with her mother, when Mrs. Zelia asked, "Daughter, do you regret anything?" Lourdes thought for a moment and replied, "No, Mum, I don't regret anything, because everything I went through brought me here. And here I'm okay, I'm at peace." Mrs. Zelia smiled, her eyes glistening. "You are strong, my daughter, stronger than I am." "No, Mom," Lourdes said, holding her mother's hand. "I am strong because you taught me, because Grandma taught me, because all the women in our family taught me. Strength is in our blood, and it's also here." She touched the blue bead necklace. "Here, where they all live." And the two sat there in silence, hand in hand, feeling the invisible presence of all the women who came before, all the laundresses, all the cooks, all the cleaning ladies, all the mothers, all the grandmothers, all the warriors who carried the world on their shoulders and never gave up. And that's how this simple woman, who just wanted respect, showed that true brilliance isn't in gold, but in the soul. That the truth doesn't need to shout, because it always comes out. And that dignity cannot be stolen, cannot be bought, cannot be lost, because it comes from within, and no one can take that away from us. And you, what did you think of this story? What lesson did it leave you with? Tell us in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. That way you won't miss any of our heartwarming stories every day.